Thank you so much for having us, Terry. It is so fun to be chatting with this class, especially because we're getting a chance to work with your class in a variety of ways this fall. I'm Grace Pomroy, and I'm the director of the Stewardship Leaders Program. So in addition to teaching classes, I teach money in the mission of the church and funding forward. I also work with Catherine and our colleague Arlene Flancher to run the Stewardship Leaders Program, which looks both interior to Luther students and exterior to the broader church. So the great thing is getting to know us now is a real benefit to you because as you go out into ministry, we hope you'll still be interacting with us. I am a Luther Seminary graduate. I graduated in 2012 with a degree in Congregational Mission and Leadership. So kind of like the MA LIM program today, but it was an MA in CML. I ended up working at Luther Seminary after I graduated in the Stewardship Leaders Program, which was such an exciting experience. When I came to Luther, I had never heard the word stewardship before, never, not once. And I learned about it because I became a student worker in the program. And I fell in love with it and became a real passion for me. It was a wonderful way for me to connect my faith with the way that I lived out that faith in daily life with all that God had entrusted to my care, money being a piece of that. Money was a piece that always interested me. And so after I left Luther Seminary, being on staff for about a year and a half, I went and worked in capital campaign consulting and strategic planning, and then spent the last 5 years working as a financial educator at Portico Benefit Services. So I often say my career has been all about this adventure of how do we use our money to the best of our ability. And let me say truthfully, it's not our money, it's God's money. We are stewards of what God has entrusted to us. So how do we take our finances through the lens of our faith? That's been what my career has been about so far, and it's been really fun to explore that with our Luther Seminary students and also with the broader church through this role.
So I'm Catherine Malotky. I'm an ELCA pastor ordained in 1986, also a graduate of Luther Seminary. I have spent time in parish ministry and then moved into editing at Augsburg Fortress, the ELCA's publishing arm. And while I was there, I started working with the stewardship team at the ELCA to develop annual campaigns for congregations in the ELCA. I ended up at Portico and eventually, after learning about all those benefits, was asked to run the retirement planning group. And what was exciting about that was I was working with our peers, the people who work for churches, service for the sake of the gospel. And I came to realize that the economic environment, ecology, context in which people are doing ministry is complicated, interesting, really interesting, but complicated. And that's true socially, from a societal point of view, but it's also true within a congregation, and it's also true personally. And so as Luther works at developing future leaders, having some sense of what's happening in all three of those environments, how do we integrate that? Because it impacts our personal well-being, it impacts the well-being of our congregations, and it's certainly a reflection of what's true about many of our members and what's happening in their lives and the lives of our civic life together. That's where a lot of my passion for this kind of information comes. After I left Portico, I ended up being the director of development at Luther Seminary, and now for the last several years have been half-time working first with the Center for Stewardship Leaders and now with Grace in the Stewardship Leadership Program. And my focus has been on personal finance, because here's the deal. Those of us who are in the helping professions, we approach our financial lives like this. La, 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 la. Psychological way we talk about approach avoidance. We know it's important, but oh my gosh, no, don't want to do that. You know, we learn, some of us end up learning Hebrew and Greek. We can do this. It's a different language, but we can do it. Knowing a little can reduce anxiety a lot. And it makes us better leaders because our own personal sense of well-being financially has an enormous impact on our capacity and our freedom to lead.
In our course on innovation, one of the first really critical things that we go after is how are we going after a particular challenge, and then how we design around that will make all the difference. It's so hard to figure out what's the exact challenge we're going after. So let's say the Sunday school numbers are down, but maybe Sunday school isn't the adaptive challenge. Maybe it's how do we come alongside families to form faith. That's actually the deeper challenge. We've had a lot of disruptions with the COVID-19 and then a lot of other things in 2020. I want to use this moment in the church's life and the interruptions that we've experienced to think about the role that economics play and how this moment both reveals like the deeper issues, the deeper challenges, but also can help us kind of expose what are our assumptions about economics and financial models. Can you say something about the role economics play in ministry and about these kind of assumptions or things that often need to be unveiled as we think about moving forward?
Do you want me to go first, Catherine?
Go for it, Grace. Go for it.
Yeah, so I think something that Catherine and I know for sure I won't speak for Catherine, have seen a lot with congregations in particular, but I think this happens in the faith-based nonprofit sector as well, is there's this big separation between our mission, what we are actually in the business of doing, and then there's the money piece on the side that's funding it. But if we could keep this really solid line between the two of them, people would think that was a lot more healthy. And yet what Catherine and I have found, and I have seen in person, is if we can get rid of that line in between the two, a lot of rich ministry can happen there. But this bifurcation between mission and ministry being on one side, that's our real work. And then we have to deal with this dirty thing called money over here on the side. And in fact, if I'm a leader and I can export that to someone else to do that dirty work so I can focus on the clean stuff, that's better. That bifurcation just doesn't work. And I think something that the pandemic has forced us to do, not to go there too quickly, is really to see how these two things are coming together, because we face not only mission and ministry challenges, but also some economic challenges that are coupled together. So people are beginning to see the relationship between mission, ministry, and money. What's interesting to me is that in a lot of congregations, there's a desire for some creativity and innovation around this side of their work with mission and ministry. But when it comes to the budget, they kind of want to keep that the same every year. Maybe we'll adjust up and down just a little bit. But again, we don't want to spend too much time on that dirty work piece of the puzzle. And yet, I think if we were able to bring these two elements together, if we could actually bring in the mission and use that as a lens for how we view our budget and do some realignment work, it would be really exciting. And something that I have been seeing is how congregations have used this moment where a lot of leadership is shifting, where finances are shifting, where the use of our building is shifting, to say, hey, like, let's crack open what's going on this side and give ourselves some permission to rethink a few pieces of this puzzle, because we kind of threw up all the puzzle pieces and now we're seeing how they're going to land. And we've given ourselves permission to kind of unlock something that for a lot of congregations has been held under lock and key for ages.
I totally agree with Grace. It's so interesting because if we're focused on the mission, as Grace has said, pretty mono-focused on the mission. And I love that, Grace, when you said kind of outsources this dirty thing called money. People in the pews live in this strange place where in church, because of the way we've been taught, money is as Grace said, it's kind of dirty. It's not very seemly for us, certainly as leaders, to care about money. And it's not very seemly for congregational members to care about money. And what we hear often in congregations is all you ever do is talk about money. And so what's going on behind that? Why does it feel that way? And I think in many ways, and this is the big stewardship conversation at one level, we only talk about money when we're asking for money. And then on another level, none of us really understand it, particularly if we're in the helping professions and our focus is on the mission. And that's where the move towards health is, to understand enough about money so that you don't have this kind of resistance. The other dynamic that's going on there culturally is that we're seeing this powerful bifurcation in the wealth and income, so that at the same time that we don't want to have to think about money, we are becoming more and more dependent on people with significant wealth to fund the things that make life rich: the arts, education, and our spiritual life together. That's really complicated. I don't like that there's that bifurcation at all. And there are plenty of people, frankly, good donors out there who don't like it either, but they happen to have a lot of money. And how do we help them then? How do we facilitate their generosity and their sense of stewardship for this gift that they may not have asked for or worked ruthlessly for or anything like that? Because of the way our culture values different kinds of work, they've suddenly got a boatload of money and their neighbor has very little. And I think the complexity, especially for us as Christians, if we truly believe that God created all of us of equal value, how do we make sense of that? You know, bringing that together is important, both in terms of, oh my gosh, you got to fund the mission, right? It costs money. You got to do this. And the other side is, how do we come to terms together about these deep things about what it means to be in community, both within a congregation in some cases, and certainly within a metropolitan area or a regional area, and globally? How do we come to some understanding theologically and have some awareness personally about how we respond to that as stewards, like Grace said? All of it is God's gift to us. So what do we do about that?
I'm married to an accountant who's now basically a director of a ministry nonprofit. And it has been really fun for me over the years to look at the world of finance through his eyes, who understands the complexity of that better than I do. And to have him shift from this accountant mindset where you have to know where every penny is to this leading by faith mindset in this faith-based nonprofit. One of the things that has been unveiled for me over that I think is being unveiled in a big way right now, is that a lot of our ministries, especially within what I call mainline denominations that really are targeted to the middle class-ish, have this idea that to be healthy, we need to be self-sustaining economically, financially. And that means our members, by their stewardship giving, can sustain us. And we assume that the economic conditions in the environment around us is going to be stable, so they will have work and jobs and whatever, and none of that's going to be disrupted. And all of that has been disrupted. Where my husband would say, you need to diversify. You need many streams of income. You need to think that conditions are going to come. Like, he has a different way of seeing the financial world. Talk to me about some of what you see around that unveiling and assumptions that ministry leaders have, and some of the openings, right, to think differently or to come at that in a different way.
This is enormous. And I agree with your husband 100% on the diversifying of income streams, which I realize to seminary students probably doesn't sound that unusual. But if we were sitting here with a group of church leaders, treasurers aside, this would sound incredibly unusual and would sound like we don't have faith in God and don't have faith in our people. But in fact, I think that this idea, what we're now calling in our area funding forward, is exactly what we need to be doing. I was listening to a presentation the other day by a Presbyterian pastor in California. And as I'm sure some of you know, we often find that the coasts are the ones that see this change before we tend to see it here in the middle and the Midwest. And what he was saying is this idea that we are depending solely on the offering plate to fund all of our mission and ministry is an issue that is coming to the floor, and it is not going away. And I think it is both a technical and an adaptive challenge in that I think that there are ways that our ministries could be doing a lot better work in the area of fundraising and cultivating cultures of generosity. So that is a piece of this puzzle. The reason why this offering plate isn't sustainable is in one part because we haven't been very good at talking about money with our people. And there's some great leadership and techniques out there to help with that. And Catherine and I can certainly connect your students with those areas of expertise. But I think there's another piece here too. that most congregations, even if they did their very best fundraising work, would still not be able to fund their mission solely off of the offering plate. So there's an adaptive part of this too. And the interesting thing is congregations have been dealing with this for a long time, particularly those congregations that have served urban, more low-income populations, those serving the homeless, those serving minority communities, our communities of color in particular. They have been dealing with this a lot longer than us. And I think we need to be taking on what they have seen for valuable funding strategies. And there's a variety of ways we can do this. But one of the biggest things I think we have to come to terms with is our assets and our constraints. So what are the assets that we have? Because people looking just at the offering plate are only looking at that income that's coming in on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, depending on how it works. But they're not considering their building as an asset. They aren't considering other forms of capital. They aren't considering their endowment. How do we take into account all the pieces of our financial puzzle? And how do we use this as a missional moment to go out into the neighborhood and live our mission in an entirely new way? Some exciting examples of this that we've seen are particularly around social enterprise, particularly with youth ministries. Oftentimes in these tight eras, and I hate to say this out loud, but it's the truth, but when budgets get tight, youth ministry and other social programs are often the first things to get cut from a church's budget. So they've been the places of real innovation and creativity here. I'm thinking, for example, of a youth ministry out in, I believe it's the Seattle area, that started a lawn mowing ministry with his youth. It gave the youth job experience. It gave them a wage. It also gave him a way to interact with his youth that was way more effective than bringing people together on a Wednesday night. For him, the conversations that happened on the lawn while they were doing someone's landscaping or mowing was way more effective than trying to get them to carve out a little bit more time during their really busy weeks. And he found that to be an effective way of doing ministry, and it also was sustainable. So when it came to moments like this of the pandemic to say, do we really want to keep this person? This person is not only doing great work with youth, they are also creating a model that's sustainable into the future and giving, I think, real great memories and job experience for these for the youth that he was working with, which were primarily men, but really giving them some financial incentive as well as spiritual guidance in the midst of that.
This is a perspective coming out of my experience, and it's being highlighted, my experience as a fundraiser, and it's being highlighted now during COVID. And that is that some people and some congregations are seeing minimal impact, minimal financial impact, because their people are the kinds of people that can work from home. They haven't been downsized. Their work is not dependent on being face-to-face with others necessarily, or if it is, they're in environments where they can be safe. And I think for some congregations, like is true for some wealthy people, what does it mean to be a steward of what we have for the sake of those who have not experienced the kind of privilege, the societal privilege, because of their color or because of other factors. I mean, Grace is absolutely right. Inner city ministries have been doing this kind of stuff for a long time. 40 years ago, I was working with a congregation, and half the pastor's job was to raise money from partner congregations. So Grace is talking about what can you do to fund your ministry if the offering plate doesn't do it. And the other thing to think about is, what if we're the kind of congregation that should be supporting? So I think that's an interesting conversation too, because it, just like for the rest of us who have more than we need, asking the question, how much is enough, is still really critical. And that's in many ways feels like a brand new question for a congregation to ask. How much is enough?
That is exactly the question that needs to be asked. And I think that there's kind of two different pieces of that. I mean, I think there's the part of the fact that for many congregations, because we have been living under a scarcity mindset for so long, the idea that we have enough to span the pandemic is not giving them the impetus to do the innovative thinking to say, well, what does that mean? Because there are
Yeah.
also, as you mentioned, congregations that are not only doing just fine, keeping along as normal, but congregations that had an increase in income due to the pandemic. Likely their members thought they might struggle, so they've given donations early or given over and above, which is great. But
Yeah.
the question is, do we really need it? And not to be critical of the capital campaign consulting world, but I saw so much happen, especially of senior pastors kind of coming to their final year, you know, wanting to lead a program where they built on a new edition so that that could be their legacy. And I think our question needs to be, does our legacy have to happen inside our own walls? Is there some work that we can be doing outside to make sure that other congregations are just as vital as ours, if not even more vital? And I think we're seeing some of this happening in Massachusetts, for instance. There is a fund, I can't remember the exact organization, I think it's a foundation that's organized churches in Massachusetts who have this abundance of wealth, like you're talking about, Catherine, or are sustainable, to be able to transfer money to some of these other congregations where you don't have an individual partnership, but you have somebody else who's doing the work of identifying and you can give to that fund. The other way I've seen this happen too is around funding forward ideas of congregations that are getting close to closing, but have maybe a vital ministry but can't afford it anymore, of yoking together and taking that congregation that has the most vital land to be able to sell off so that all congregations can afford in that space to still be in ministry, and kind of closing down and combining together. So there's also some fruitful ministry that can be done when we think about not only kind of what is our mission and how are we fulfilling that and how is it going to grow into the future, but how can we make sure we're sustaining others? I'm so glad you brought that up, Catherine, because it's so important.
Well, it's two sides of the same coin in many ways,
That's
right? Yep.
So here's what I'm hearing so far. We have to take seriously an understanding of economics. And I heard, Catherine, you say our own feelings about money, but also the role that economics play in ministry to be healthy. Second, I heard both of you say, however we deal with our economics, however we engage them, we want to tie them to our mission. We want to create a relationship. And whether that's too much or too little, as we were just talking, how does this help us fulfill? How does this help us move into where God is calling us? The third thing I heard you say is we need to work with our environment. I thought of a story of two of our Lutheran congregations, one in Minneapolis and St. Paul, that were in the heart of the disruption, the looting and the disruption of the protests after the George Floyd death here, and how they turned on a dime to be responsive. They flowed with it, and resources and stewarding of our time and our talent all came together as they worked with the environment. And the last thing I heard you say is collaborate, find new partners, ask new questions, whether it's other ministries, whether it's people with other expertise, whatever. Is there anything else I'm missing or that you would want to say as we think about the role economics plays in our health and vitality, but also in moments of disruption?
One of the most important things that we need to do as leaders is to get clear about our own stuff. That's why you get sent to CPE. And I think getting clear about our own money stuff is important. We may not like capitalism. I know there are a lot of people who don't like capitalism, who are deeply suspicious of business and that kind of stuff. But I want to hold up something that Grace said, where she talked about social enterprise. And I wonder if we can get beyond that resistance enough to say, because I think this is a faithful way to think of it, wouldn't it be awesome if our entire economy had a social enterprise point of view? That profit would be important, but for the sake of additional ministry. In order to do that, we as ministry leaders need to have a healthy enough relationship with capitalism, with the economy, with basics about that stuff. I just want to point out, I have a master's degree in theater. I can't add. So it's just important to know that I'm having this conversation with you, and I do not consider myself to be a money wizard. In this country, money is so important that we really can't afford to ignore it. And I think there's powerful pastoral opportunity if we can get beyond simply rejecting it. I used to say when I was teaching pre-retirement seminars, okay, capitalism is what we've got. How do we do it well?
I really appreciate both get clear on your stuff and recognizing the system of capitalism around us. One of the things I dove into that for an article I was writing and became fascinated by it. Like theology, people can reject God when they have like a third grade Jesus loves me theology. That's how I was kind of approaching capitalism, with like a third to fifth grade comprehension level. The more I got deeper into it, the more I saw not only the complexities, but openings, possibilities, ways that there's some similar things that we could tease out. It's not the thing. God, serving God is my big thing. Underneath that faithful kind of commitment come some possibilities. And I think, Catherine, that's what you're challenging us to think deeply around that. And many nonprofit world, I think of social entrepreneurship as a whole, have been very creative that we could learn from.
I think even our people who are working in for-profit worlds, oh my gosh, right? Well, my conviction is that a social enterprise orientation, the values that are driving that will create healthier companies.
I totally agree with you guys. And I think part of this conversation, both on the individual level for a leader, as well as the individual level for a congregation, is letting go of our ego. We don't have to be the best in the biz on that. In fact, there's a congregation down the street, or likely a corporation down the street, that's doing really great work. And guess what? One of the people that works there is in our congregation. So how do we work with them? And I think the church was so used to being the center of social change that we don't know how to be now a partner, a referrer. And I know Catherine is super passionate about this. I hear this in her work a lot, especially in this book group we've been doing on the index card of how do we be the ones who are pointing to the experts and not feeling like we have to do everything in-house. And I think on an individual level, I think as leaders, we often are so afraid of failure that the idea of going into this money domain, this wilderness that we're a little bit unsure about, is just scary because we don't want to make the wrong choice. So we'd rather offload it to someone else who knows more. And I think if Catherine and I could stress anything to you, like she said earlier, it's okay to begin to learn and take a few steps. You don't need to know everything about finance, but we can teach you how to ask the right questions so that when you're in the room, you're asking missional-minded questions of your money. So if you're seeing the money, the assets, the property that you have, not as a barrier, but as a tool that enables ministry for the sake of the neighbor. It's not money, because that's who we are as a church and we want to be a capitalistic church. It's because we want to be able to enable God's love and God's gospel, the gospel for our neighbor. And money is a tool that allows us to do that. And getting to know the basics, getting to know your story, and something Catherine and I are exploring soon is also our privilege stories, which I think is crucial in this, can allow you to come into that conversation not knowing everything, but knowing enough about money to be able to ask good questions.
I love that. That fits, I think, with the innovative mindset, the curiosity, the going deeper, the exploring wider, of wondering who might have a disruptive idea that we could experiment with or do jazz on and take us to a new future. I'm grateful for both of your leadership. I'm grateful the missional spirit. You said it right there at the end. This is about another way we can love God and our neighbor, with some new partners, with some new questions, with some new kind of frameworks to help us do well. Sometimes we just need some guidance to take us into some new places.
The pandemic has taught us that the realities of how people are impacted and how organizations are impacted is scattered. And in the midst of something that seems so constraining, how can we begin to see those constraints as a gift, as something that inspires innovation rather than something that crushes it?
You have everything you need. You can do this.